So, welcome to everyone, and especially welcome to Ruth, Dr. Ruth Valerio, who I think has much in common with Christians Aware as someone who works for justice and equality and the alleviation of poverty. And I think you've always done that through work with Tearfund and a group we hear more and more about now, A Rocha, but now you're with Embrace the Middle East. And your title is Programme Partnerships and Advocacy Director with Embrace the Middle East. And as many of us know, Embrace is a charity which has a partnership with Christians in the Middle East and works for community building and the alleviation of poverty and, of course, justice there. It's very difficult, really, to introduce this evening's presentation without being sad. I think there's so much we pray for and hope for, and so much horror that continues to go on in our focus tonight of Israel and Palestine, that it is hard to be at all optimistic. But I hope in going through the evening, we will learn more, we will listen, and we will come to an understanding which will help us to go forward and to do things we can do in partnership with the people in the Middle East, and especially at this time with people in Israel and in Palestine, and thinking especially of people in the Gaza. I wanted to read something before we start from one of our very first books, which was Palestinian Pain and Promise. And it was written by Lynn Reed Banks, which I think is very appropriate for all our work now. She wrote, "Remember, as you read and as you live, nothing is ever simple. The more it looks black and white, the deeper you should dig. You should dig to find the grey. Grey sounds dull, but grey is the colour of the mind." Lynn Reed Banks. And that was our very first book on the Middle East, one of our very first books, Palestinian Pain and Promise. I think tonight we will dig deep and we will listen and we will learn. Thank you, Ruth. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you for that reading. It's really powerful and such a good reminder for all of us. If something looks simple, then we probably need to dig deeper. There are some things that I am going to say are simple this evening, but there are lots of things that are not simple, and I hope I represent some of those things this evening. I'm very aware we have different levels of knowledge and understanding around the Middle East here on the call this evening. And so I'm trying to sort of bring in a range of different things, probably pitch it too low or pitch it too high or something, but we'll see. But it is great to be able to speak with you about the situation in the Middle East. It's something, of course, that I'm very involved with through my work with Embrace the Middle East, and it is just an absolute privilege to be able to stand with and support local Christians, churches, and local Christian organizations as they work to tackle poverty and injustice in some of the most marginalized and needy and vulnerable communities in our world. And on joining Embrace the Middle East a bit more than a year ago, I've very quickly came to realize that actually Embrace doesn't do any work. All of the work is done by the partners who we support. So we can't take credit for anything, but it is a real privilege to be able to support some amazing organizations and amazing individuals working to do good and bring hope in some of the most challenging of situations. And excuse me, I've had a cold, so you're going to have to forgive a froggy throat. As we see what's happening on our televisions, it's heartbreaking to be so involved with it, but also it just feels a privilege to be able to play just a tiny, tiny little part in helping to bring some good there. I want to touch on a whole range of different things this evening and want to start. Matt is very kindly doing my PowerPoint for me. Want to start with this picture, which is me standing on a balcony, looking out over the hills as the sun sets. And I'm standing in Jordan. The Dead Sea is about 6 miles to my left, to the left of the picture. And I'm standing in an amazing project called Greening the Desert. It's a permaculture project that is run by an Australian man and a Bedouin woman, their husband and wife, a Bedouin woman from the local area. And they're running this project along permaculture principles and showing how it is possible to work with nature, even in the arid, rocky Jordanian desert. It is possible to work with nature to bring about nature's flourishing. And I'm here standing there as part of a conference that I'm at in Jordan. And excuse me, I'm just going to clear my throat because I'm getting froggier and froggier. So I'm there as part of a conference in Amman that's drawing together local Christian organizations from across the Middle East who are involved in working in climate change and other environmental initiatives. And we went up, there's a little cafe, and we were given some food. And I'm standing on the balcony looking out over those hills as the sun sets. And on the other side of the hill there that you can see right where the sun is setting is Jericho. And Jericho, of course, is a place that we are so familiar with from our Bibles and our Bible readings. And I was so struck to think, there is Jericho, this historical place, and it's in the West Bank. I'm going to assume that you all know that. Maybe some of you didn't, I don't know. But for me, a trip to Israel is always a surprising reminder. And forgive me if you've been on pilgrimages or you're very familiar with Israel, but a trip to Israel is always for me a surprising reminder that places in the Bible are actually real. They're real physical places, many of which still exist today. I think of Nazareth. One of my team at Embrace the Middle East is from Nazareth. Her family still lives there, and she tells me stories of what it's like there as the local government is falling apart. There's no rubbish collection. The rubbish is piling up in the car parks and just huge problems because of the underinvestment, because it's a Palestinian area. And Nazareth has that particular kind of romantic view in our minds, doesn't it? Because of our Bible stories. And yet it's a place that exists today. Samaria of course, the woman from Samaria or the Good Samaritan, that was near Nablus. Bethlehem, of course. And I'm reminded in all of the troubles that we are seeing today and have seen for so long of the particularity of Jesus as a Jew. Um, and we think of these places, these historical places that are real today. And the key one of these, of course, is Jerusalem, which you can see in my next picture. And that's just a couple of shots from Jerusalem's old city, one of the most amazing places, I think, in the world. And if we go on to the next slide, you can see the map of the old city, just a mile by a mile, such a small area. But that map gives a sense of the complexity of the city. You have history, religion, theology, myth, ethnicity, all of these things all come together. And this is what we're stepping into when we look at the current situation in Israel and Palestine. It's very, very complex. And I think anybody who steps into it is brave because it is so complex. And it's not only complex, but it's very emotive. If any of you are on social media and do anything on social media, you will know that you put something up about the current situation and you will be bombarded on all sides by opinions. As I say, history, theology, politics, all combined and all overlaid. I'm part of a small private kind of facilitated conversation between some pro-Palestinian, if you want to use that language, Christians, a Christian Zionist, a Messianic believer, and we're currently in a regular dialogue where we're meeting online for an hour and a half, exploring together the theology, exploring the history, exploring the politics, trying to have some form of dialogue, trying to find where we might have some common points between us. I have to say they're pretty few and far between, but all of these things are just overlaid and mixed in. I want to say that it's impossible to be neutral. We all come with our biases, and that's okay. We can be real and honest about that. What I think is important is that we acknowledge that and we're willing to listen and to learn and to have humility. It's those grey areas again, isn't it? If something seems simple, that probably means we need to do some digging down and uncover the complexities. So I want to ask you to be willing to acknowledge that you're not neutral. I'm not neutral. We all come with our biases and we need to listen and to learn. We ultimately we need to, or most importantly, we need to have humility together. I'm I'm not going to try and give you a detailed lecture on all the all that mix of theology and history and politics. It's way too complicated to do it justice in the time that we've got. But I want to just touch on some of those things and then look at the current situation. So if we can go on to the next slide, I've just put up some of the key historical events. And of course, you can see I've stopped in the year 2000, and there's so much more that could be added, but I didn't want to do too much. And I'm just putting that up in case it's helpful. Again, I don't know where you're coming from, and I don't know your level of knowledge or understanding If you've got a camera and you want to look more, you might just want to take a quick picture of that and then encourage you to do your own investigation and looking into those different historical events. Each one of those is contested in terms of what actually happened, who was right, who was wrong, why things happened. Even on the history, there is no agreement between the different sides. Everybody views the history differently depending on the perspective that they bring, and that can make it very, very complex to get to some solid ground to stand on. So I'd encourage you to have a look at those different events and do some reading around that. Just to give a snapshot on the way that the history can be interpreted, I'm going to give you two very brief interpretations. So on our next slide, there's the two readings of the same history. So version one, from the Jewish perspective, though of course not all, but many Jews see the return of the Jews to the land and the establishment of the state of Israel as a sign of God's faithfulness to his people. Many see Israel's control over and actions in the territories as necessary to maintain security and prevent further escalation. And some see it as part of God's promise to Greater Israel and therefore view military service as a duty to their country. If we can go on to version two, many Palestinian Christians see the presence of the Christian church in their land as a testimony to the faithfulness of God, and the establishment of the state of Israel as a catastrophe for their people. They see the Palestinian refugee problem, the lack of equality within Israel, the ongoing occupation and the expansion of settlements as illegal and unjust. And they see their survival and duty to involve resistance to these injustices by peaceful, legal, and non-violent means. And as you can see, I've taken those two versions from something called the Larnaca Statement. And if you want to do more looking into this topic, I really encourage you to, you can just find it online, really encourage you to look up the Larnaca Statement. It comes as a process of conversation and dialogue, and there's a lot of richness in there. And then there are different versions, of course, of the theological readings and the biblical interpretations, if we can go on to the next slide. So some Christians believe that the uncancelled covenant of God with Israel continues to include the promise of the land to the Jewish people as the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that the return of Jews to the land and the establishment of the state of Israel constitute the fulfillment of biblical prophecies, particularly relating to eschatology and what we might refer to as the end times. And then a different version, other Christians believe that all God's covenant promises, including the land, are fulfilled in the Messiah, Jesus, as the one who embodies the true sonship and inheritance of Israel, embracing the whole earth and all nations. And so all those from any nation who are united to Christ by faith share in the inheritance that is his, and are the seed of Abraham, and heirs according to God's promise. Of course, what I've put up here in the two readings of the theology and the two versions of the same history, this is really simplistic. There's so much more that we could talk about in those, but I just wanted to give you that snapshot of how differently people can see the same biblical text and the same history and come to very different conclusions. On the next slide, and again, you might like to take a picture of this if that's helpful. Some places that you might like to look at for further reference. I've put in our good friend Harry, who is on the call. And Harry, it would be great to bring you in at some point, and you could tell us a little bit about your work and where people can find your writing and the things that you're talking about. But I've put up here some, not all, but some of the people who you might like to read. Not this is not necessarily me endorsing them. They're coming from different perspectives, but I think they're all interesting and all worth reading. And of course, there's loads more that we can read as well. There are so many books, but I guess this is just where to start as a beginner, if you like. So then, where do we find ourselves today? If we can have the next slide, please. Today, we, of course, find ourselves in a horrendous situation. If the theology and the history and the politics and all of it are complex, then actually, as I indicated at the beginning, there is some simplicity that comes in, which is that what we are seeing today is awful. You've all read and seen the footage. We're seeing it every day, aren't we? Simply put, Gaza is a human and a humanitarian catastrophe with intensified Israeli military attacks on Gaza City. We're seeing that this week, aren't we? We're seeing ground forces even today, I was reading, and forced displacement orders for the entire city. And leaving families with an impossible dilemma. Flee and risk death as you travel, or end up in overcrowded displacement areas, or stay and face relentless bombardment in whatever shelter you can find. It increasingly appears that starvation and siege await people of whatever decision they decide on. At Embrace, we've been in contact with two friends in Gaza this week, and I think maybe you'd be better served by hearing their words. On Monday, one of them is a wonderful doctor from the Al Ahli hospital that Embrace the Middle East serves, told us that the situation is getting worse. A lot of people leaving for the south, in spite of the uncertainty of having a better and safer situation there. But he says, as a Christian, we trust our Lord in helping us and trust that he will bring his peace to the whole world. These words were written by a man filled with grace, a doctor and someone who himself has experienced the death of a loved one over this time. And I'm struck time and again by the outworking of God's grace in very tangible ways in his people. This isn't just holding on by your fingernails, if you'll forgive me mixing my metaphors. God's grace is deep and wide, and I see that in the life and in the character of this man. Forgive me because I'm not giving out any names, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. He's still serving at Al Ahli Hospital. Today, we don't know if the hospital and its work will be able to continue in Gaza City, as the Israeli efforts to destroy Hamas are also destroying everything else, and the situation is desperate. We do know they're putting in contingency plans. We were in contact with another one of our partners, and they are also have got contingency plans looking at whether they can set up satellite stations down in the south. Some of them, the church has said that they're not moving, they're staying to serve. The situation is just so uncertain. We asked another partner, actually, I asked another partner how he would address you and what he would ask you. And he said this: maybe one major and most important point. Why is the world still not able to force to stop the war where people are still killed every day? Does it become a usual scene and news that our people are killed every day? And then he finished by saying, thank you and keep praying. Another one of our partners is the Near East Council of Churches, and we support their work to provide children under 5 the best start in life. Every year, some 20,000 under 5s and their mothers receive regular checks, support with nutrition, action plans to stop stunting and anemia, a programme that has really high success rates. So many good initiatives like this helping the people of Gaza have had to pivot only into urgent life-saving care. The work that they've been doing over the years has just been destroyed and set back beyond all imagination because of the fierce and unfettered response of the Israeli government to the horrific attacks of October the 7th, 1923, 2023. Nothing can excuse any of this. The attacks, the hostage taking, the continued torment of the 20 or so who are still being held, or the rampage of killing, nothing. The situation is so desperate, and continued fighting is not going to change it. And then the West Bank. While the world is aghast at the situation in Gaza, there is a huge amount to be troubled about in Jerusalem and the West Bank. The most right-wing Israeli government in history is making significant daily strides that will ultimately end any possibility of a two-state solution. Some years ago, Embrace hosted the Oxford-based Israeli academic Avi Shleim for an Embrace lecture, and he gave a very simple analogy. He said Netanyahu is, and this was quite a long time ago, not sure how many years, but he said Netanyahu is like a man who pretends to be negotiating the division of a pizza while he keeps eating it. And in the West Bank fairly recently, and it was heartbreaking hearing from our partners who were working into Gaza, and also seeing the continued impacts of the Israeli settlements coming in with increased checkpoints. There are now hundreds of roadblocks that have been put in. So a journey that might before have taken 20 minutes can take 2 hours. And the Israelis can close off roads just without warning whenever they want to. So there are now WhatsApp groups set up where people can put up and say this road has been closed, that road has been closed. And I saw firsthand through the checkpoints and actually in East Jerusalem, young Palestinian men who had done nothing. They were just going about their days, being taken off by the police or by the IDF and frisked, and so all the contents of their bags chucked all over the floor. They were pressed against a wall. All their smart black clothes were made dirty, and it's just there's serious level harassment, and there's also just this daily drip feeding of kind of low level harassment that continues. So the West Bank is a heartbreaking place alongside Gaza. And a couple of my colleagues actually have been out this week and just got back at the weekend. And I was chatting with one of them today, and she was telling me she's travelled before coming to Embrace. She worked for an international NGO and has been to all sorts of places. And she said the level of desperation and resignation was something that she hadn't seen in other places. Also, resolution, resilience, resistance, also still there, but that deep recognition of what is happening. One of the issues that Embrace the Middle East is currently raising awareness of is the issue of the arbitrary military detention of Palestinian children. And this is something that happens at an alarming rate and is absolutely unjust and absolutely breaks humanitarian law. If you would love, while I'm talking, or we could do it afterwards, go on to the Embrace website and you'll see the campaign that we're running called Childhood Behind Bars. And that says more about what we are focusing on and what we're calling the government to do. So the situation today is awful and perilous. And these pictures, there's so many more I could have put up. And of course, I could have put up a picture of the UN and the recent recognitions of Palestine. But these were just, so the one on the top right was the killing in the church in Damascus. Of course, we had the bombings of Iran, and there's just been so much happening, hasn't there? But I've put those up just as a little snapshot of the situation that we face today. A situation where we have a state that is increasingly by which I mean Israel, increasingly going rogue and has moved from an international aim of normalization to an aim of hegemony. And I was sitting in on a webinar with some Middle East experts last week, and this is something that they were talking about, that Israel's aim has moved because of what's been happening. Up till October the 7th, they were focused on normalization with their neighbors. But now, with Trump's backing, they're focused on hegemony. And we have the absolute, forgive me, lunacy of the US president. I was actually reading today a theory around madmen from a political perspective, and I would put him in that bracket. Almost a deliberate policy of instability and unpredictability, so that which then leads to fear from all the other nations, because they don't know how to respond and they don't know what they're going to get back. And it's kind of played on this madman myth. Anyway, that's something you can look into. And then we have this ongoing recognition of Palestine now, growing and increasing with the moves that are happening at the UN at the moment. So just some huge jigsaw puzzles, or some huge pieces, excuse me, that are sitting there of this jigsaw puzzle that is the very, very complex region of the Middle East, with Israel and Palestine now at its center. So how can we respond? What can we do? It can feel impossible, can't it? Sitting, watching our news, looking at social media. How can we respond? And I do want to say that there are some things that we can do. And this will be my final slide. Going back to where I started, I want to ask all of us, myself included, to do the internal work, by which I mean the internal work around humility, around listening and learning, around peacemaking. We are all called to be peacemakers in our lives, in our families, in our churches, in our work situations, in our communities. You think of what's happening In the UK currently, with the rise of Christian nationalism, we are called in the midst of that to be peacemakers. We cannot immediately bring peace to the Middle East, but we can do our own internal work and reflect on our own hearts and our own attitudes. I encourage you to talk to others. It can be really hard, can't it? Because as I said, I know this is so complex, and not just complex, but hugely emotive. And people bring very, very different views. I live on a council estate, and someone who I've known, I don't know, probably for 20 years is the local the local corner shop on the estate who's Iranian, and we've just sort of chatted over the years. And I bumped into him. He was out walking his dog, and we were having a catch up. And he asked what I was doing now, and so I said, how are you? What do you think of the situation? And it was very interesting hearing from him because he had a very particular view that was quite different to mine. Um, and so that's good. It's good to talk to others. It's good to listen. Always to be reminded that not everybody thinks the way that I do. Doesn't mean I'm not right, but not everybody thinks the way that I do. So let's talk to others, and just gently in our families and amongst in our church, let's find ways to raise this issue. And I would encourage us to raise this in our churches. My experience is that many churches are pretty scared of talking about this situation because they know that it's so emotive and complex, and they're scared of saying the wrong thing. So encourage your church to find a way to do that. We've got a new resource coming out very soon called Gracious Dialogue, which is going to be, it's all around helping churches. It's not giving all the answers. It's not saying you have to have this viewpoint, but it's equipping churches with how to have the conversation, how to have that gracious dialogue. So do keep an eye on that from Embrace the Middle East. Please pray. Please pray. I still do believe that God responds and that prayer changes situations, and we need to pray. We had on Sunday the UN World Day of Peace. I don't know if you saw, but denominations all around the UK were praying using a prayer from Archbishop Hossam, the Archbishop of Jerusalem. And it might be a complete coincidence, but it just made me smile that on that day when churches all around the country were praying, that was the day that the UK announced it was recognising Palestine as a state. A coincidence, but I'm always reminded of the words of an archbishop whose name has gone out of my head, who said, "I don't know how prayer works. What I do know is that when I pray, coincidences happen, and when I don't pray, they stop happening." And for me, that's the best explanation of prayer. So please pray. And there's something that we're running along with others. Christian Aid is doing it as well, and other organisations, called Fast for Gaza, which is happening every Wednesday. And you could just put into your search engine online, Embrace the Middle East, Fast for Gaza, and you'll see a page about that. It was initiated by Richard Sewell, the Dean of St. George's College in Jerusalem. And so this is a way to stand with our Christian sisters and brothers in that situation. Please give, oh, excuse me. We can look at the situation and just feel helpless, but actually we can respond positively and we can respond financially. And I'm just going to give a completely unadulterated plug for Embrace the Middle East. So I oversee all of our grant making and our partnership work. And I can tell you categorically that money that is donated to Embrace gets given to the partners, to our partners. And in fact, we're just in the process of releasing some more funds for some of the work that we support in Gaza. So we can help. We don't need to look at the situation and think there's nothing that we can do. And then finally, take action. And by this, I mean take political action. We can pray, we can give, but I think alongside those things, we need to use our voices to speak up. One example of that is Childhood Behind Bars. And that's something, if you go onto the website, you'll see it's all set up. You can send an email to your MP. And I'd really ask you, if you do nothing else from this evening, use the facility that's online. You don't have to write it. It's all set up for you, and write to your MP, calling on the UK government to put pressure on Israel to end some of its inhumane practices around child detention. And we can be calling on the government to be doing more. Yes, it's good that the state of Palestine has been recognized, should have happened a long time ago, but there's more. We need to have stronger sanctions in place and some boycotting as well. So there is much more that the UK government can do. So when you look at the situation, please don't feel helpless. You may not be able ultimately to resolve it, but there are things that you can do, and we can all respond in one or all of the ways that is there on the screen. So I'm going to pause there. Hope that's helpful. And hand back to Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. I've been asked to address you at this point to express our appreciation for your contribution to this evening's webinar. I was very keen to hear from you. You know, I remember the days when Embrace the Middle East was Bible Lands, and it went through the transformation, and it was quite a transformation to become Embrace the Middle East. Has brought many, many benefits from it or with it. And what I love about Embrace the Middle East is that it does remind churches in this country that there are Palestinian Christians, because so many people don't know that Palestinian Christians still exist. You started your talk this evening by referring to Jericho and Nazareth and the fact that these places still exist. They're alive. There are Christians in these places as well. Of course, the wider population, which is the Muslim population. You referred to the Jews who live in that part of the world as well. There are complexities, but there's also a simplicity in it. And I think it was Harry who sort of brought us round to that as well, that there is a right and there's a wrong. We talked about justice, the fact that Christians aware justice is a very fundamental, essential part of the work that Christians aware does. You know, I really liked the information that you shared about your partners. You started talking about those in Gaza. And honestly, yes, we've got to keep them in our thoughts and prayers. And the fact their testimony in Gaza is phenomenal by staying there, as they have done so far. Some have left, yes, but there are other Christians who very much remain there, and they must remain in our thoughts and prayers. Your reference to the doctor in Gaza, the Near East Council of Churches, the work it's done. Then you moved on to what's happening in the West Bank. And honestly, you're so right to be highlighting what's happening in the West Bank as well. As Harry pointed out, the people in the West Bank are very much fearing that what's happened in Gaza will then move into the West Bank, and it already is. And so we do have to keep all those people in our thoughts and prayers. The information that you shared about how Embrace the Middle East has a new program, which is about childhood behind bars and child arrest. That's really wonderful news. And, when people want to do something and have something tangible, that is such a wonderful example, because a way that we can be reaching out to others in our churches and our neighbors, our communities, is to tell stories. This is the story of what's happening. This is a story I know. And those type of things are hard to argue against. Here is a fact. Here is something. So that's a wonderful tool that you are presenting to us. And it's great that you so clearly highlighted things that we can do, because it is urgent. It is absolutely urgent. You highlighted this madman in the White House who happens to be named Donald Trump. We are at a state where it's apartheid. It is worse than South Africa itself. But you also reminded us that situation changed. And so we've got to continue to live in hope. Really, yes, we focus on the good, we do good. Let us not give up hope. That is something I hear from Palestinian Christians a lot as well. It's hard. It's really hard at this point in time, when there's the starvation, when manipulated starvation, where there's the ethnic cleansing, where there is the genocide. Yes, you brought up so many things. Ruth, you said, yes, this is a complicated issue. It is, but you did cover a lot, which I really commend you for. And just the need for things like strong sanctions and boycotting. And honestly, every single one of us can be doing something. Every single letter to our MP means something. It's this mass of civil society growing and reacting and saying, we want a better world. We want a better way. And of course, as Christians, we know that Jesus has pointed the way. And I really thank God every day for the Palestinian Christians who are leading the way, who are an example of what it is to remain faithful, to remain resolute, to remain nonviolent in this world. As Liz said, my goodness, what is God doing? Well, we are having a tremendous shakeup in this world. I think in many ways, we've lost the way. And so let us hope and pray that a tremendous amount of good does eventually come through. And I just want to thank you again, Ruth, for what you're doing, for all that Embrace the Middle East is doing. Just lastly to say, we think of Embrace the Middle East going into churches all over this country with their Christmas carol sheets. Their foot is in the door. You can keep going back and forth time and time and time again because of the stories, because of your connection to the Middle East, to the lands of the Bible. And so God bless you, and may Embrace the Middle East just thrive at this time with all it's doing. Thank you so much, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. And thank you to everybody who's been here this evening.